All right, so in chapter 14, Hester finds Chillingworth on the beach and she confronts him and tells him that she's going to break her promise to him and she's going to go and tell Dimmsdale that Chillingworth is her husband. And when she does this, she sends Pearl to go play on the beach. So for chapter 15, we're just going to read a summary of it. It's called Hester and Pearl, and the summary is here at the top of today's assignment. So it says, as Chillingworth walks away, Hester goes to find Pearl. She realizes that, although it is a sin to do so, she hates her husband. If she once thought she was happy with him, it was only self-delusion. Pearl has been playing in the tide pools down on the beach. Pretending to be a mermaid, she puts eelgrass on her chest in the shape of an A, one that is freshly green instead of scarlet. So you can think about, why is that significant, right? That she puts an A on her chest that's made out of, nature and is green and not red. Pearl hopes that her mother will ask her about the letter, and Hester does inquire whether Pearl understands the meaning of the symbol on her mother's chest. They proceed to discuss the meaning of the scarlet letter. Pearl connects the letter to Dimmsdale's frequent habit of clutching his hand over his heart, and Hester is unnerved by her daughter's perceptiveness. She realizes the child is too young to know the truth and decides not to explain the significance of the letter to her. Pearl is persistent, though, and for the next several days she asks her mother about the letter and about the minister's habit of reaching for his heart. So, in chapter 16, it's called A Forest Walk, and the next 4 chapters are all set out in the forest and revolve around the meeting between Hester and Dimmsdale, and I love them. And so throughout the forest scene, you're going to see some transcendentalist ideas, particularly in chapter 18, but there are a couple here that I'd like to mention. So, transcendentalists believe that you should follow your own intuition, and that's exactly what Hester's doing. So it says, Hester Prynne remained constant in her resolve to make known to Mr. Dimmsdale the true character of the man who had crept into his intimacy. She's following her heart. She's doing what she thinks is the right thing to do, and she's going to tell Dimmsdale that Chillingworth is her husband. So there's one transcendentalist idea. I'll also give you a heads up that it's definitely a test question to be able to identify transcendentalist ideas in the forest scene. So when Hester decided that she wanted to meet Dimmsdale and tell him the truth in the forest, it says that both the minister and she would need the whole wide world to breathe in while they talked together. Hester never thought of meeting him in any narrower privacy than beneath the open sky. And so this really made me think of Thanatopsis. And the primary reason why it made me think of Thanatopsis is because, remember in stanza 1, how it talks about how people are afraid to die, and they might be thinking of the breathless darkness and the narrow house, but they're told to go forth under the open sky, right? So just the similar wording made me think of Thanatopsis, and the breathe with breathless darkness and narrow house, and then especially this part about going out under the open sky. And so this just brings up there's some overlap in romanticism and transcendentalism as far as they both think nature's important. But just this idea in transcendentalism is just how there's freedom in nature, right? And if you think about Puritan society, how restrictive it is, and it's you can, go out there and be true, right? Which you can't do as easily in society. But then there's also this idea that you can breathe out there, right? When times are tough, there's some comfort out in nature. And it helps you get through things, right? So the forest is a very fitting scene for Hester telling Dimmsdale the truth. It does offer privacy for them. It also is quite representative of transcendentalist ideas about having freedom from society when you're out in nature, and being able to just be who you are. So, moving on, we're really looking at pathetic fallacy to start with. So, pathetic fallacy is a literary device in which human emotion and conduct are attributed to things found in nature that are not human. And so, the Read with Purpose asks you to highlight examples of pathetic fallacy. And so, another reason why the setting, being in the forest, is quite fitting is because it says that it was black and dense. And that it was like the moral wilderness in which she had so long been wandering. So when you think of a really dense forest, like a lot of trees, right, and it's dark, it makes you think about, Hester, but also Dimmsdale, and just how over the last 7 years they've just been in darkness and they've been lost and they've been like weighed down with these heavy burdens, just in misery. And also this idea that in how it describes the forest as being black, so yes, they've been in darkness, they've been in misery, but also it kind of makes me think about how Hester's kept Chillingworth in the dark. And when it says down here that there's a gleam of flickering sunshine, it makes me think about how like light can symbolize truth, and how Hester's purpose in being there is to tell Dimmsdale the truth, right? Like, he's been in darkness on who Chillingworth is, and she's gonna shed some light on it. And so just this idea that how like the setting is described is very reflective of the emotions that Hester and Dimmsdale have been experiencing over the last 7 years, and also very fitting for Hester's purpose in being there. Even right here, it talks about how there's a gray expanse of cloud. And so typically if we think of clouds and we think of gray skies, we think of unhappiness, right? Also the fact that, if you have a lot of gray clouds, a storm could be coming, so maybe something bad could happen, or maybe it could represent like anger Dimmsdale might feel at Hester. But the fact that there's a gleam of flickering sunshine, in that, you could say that like maybe there's some hope, right? Like maybe there's a chance for happiness. The day is also described as being chill and somber. So somber really is reflective of why Hester's here and the conversation that they're going to have, because it's very serious, yeah. And so that the day also feels like that is fitting. And then chill kind of reminds me of like the fact that neither has experienced warmth in the last 7 years, but it also makes me think of Chillingworth, and it probably wasn't an accident. The day was chill, and I'm like, kind of makes me think like the day's about Chillingworth, right? So what we have is, what we have is some more light imagery down here. So Pearl says to Hester, "The sunshine does not love you. It runs away and hides itself because it's afraid of something on your bosom." And so this idea that we'll see definitely in chapter 18 as well is that this scarlet letter on Hester's chest stops her from experiencing happiness. And in fact, like Hester wants it, right? Like she reaches out, she stretches out her hand and she tries to grasp some of it, but when she attempted to do so, the sunshine vanished, okay? And so there's this idea that Hester wants happiness, right? Like she tries to get it and she can't, yeah? And so it's like, perhaps Hawthorne is saying that like there's no hope for Hester, like there's no chance of happiness for her. Perhaps it's some sort of foreshadowing, or perhaps it's not. Perhaps it's just this idea that Hester's been experiencing so much unhappiness over the last 7 years, and the fact that she's in the dark and the sunlight won't touch her is representative of that. It also makes me think of how Pearl can catch the sunshine. And in fact, she stood laughing in the midst of it. And so just this idea that like maybe the fact that Pearl can do it is because Pearl's not a sinner, right? Like, if you think of darkness and sin, black sin, right? And light is like good and pure. So maybe because Pearl is good and pure, she can be in the light. Or maybe it's because she's not confined by society, right? And so therefore she can connect to nature and she can experience happiness and there is hope for her, right? Um, so, um, if we go down here, and Pearl wants to know about the black man who haunts the forest. She says he carries a book with him, and he wants people to sign their names with their own blood. So hopefully this makes you think about the devil and Tom Walker and how the devil is out in the forest and he is trying to tempt people, like get their souls, and later, they're in Try 3. Honors reads The Crucible. It's about the Salem witch trials. And there's the same idea about how people go out into the forest and they make pacts with the devil, and the devil requires that you sign your name, basically in order to bind yourself to him. And so, why is this significant? Well, it's significant because the Puritans believed that the forest was bad, right? That the devil was out there, and that people who went out there oftentimes were compacting with the devil. And so, down here, so it's just a common superstition. I mean, I think Hester even says that, yeah, recognizing a common superstition of the period. So down here, Hester says, once in my life I met the black man. The scarlet letter is his mark. And so, I mean, probably she's referring to the devil, right? And that once she was tempted and she committed adultery, and this is her mark for that, right? You could potentially try, like, link Dimmsdale, right, to being the black man she's referring to, as far as like the kind of like, I don't want to say evil one who tempted her. You could maybe argue it's Chillingworth, right? Like in the fact that he married her. But I think those two are more of stretches. I think she's probably just referring to the temptation that she felt and then the result of it. Okay, so in this next part, I really just wanted you to notice the use of similes, personifications, and analogies. And we're not really going to spend much time at all analyzing them, but I just wanted you to see how the pine has a head. The trees, it describes how they flung down their branches like they have control of it, and that these choked up the current. And then down here it talks about the giant trees and boulders. They seemed intent. It's like they have a mind, and they can make decisions. That they fear. That the forest whispers tales and has a heart, and it's capable of having revelations, like light bulbs go off, right? Like understanding. It talks about how the stream babbles and is kind and soothing and sad, melancholy. And this right here too is a simile, right? How the streamlet was like the voice of a young child that was spending its infancy without playfulness and knew not how to be merry among sad acquaintance and events of somber hue. Okay, so on page 4 we have more personifications. So the brook is described as being foolish and tiresome. Pearl asks the brook why it's so sad and tells it to pluck up spirit. She asks that it not be all the time sighing and murmuring. The brook is described as having a lifetime and having gone through a solemn experience. It says that it could not help talking about the experience it had, and it seemed to have nothing else to say. So this is all personifying the brook. And then here is the analogy comparing Pearl to the brook. So Pearl resembled the brook in as much as the current of her life gushed from a wellspring is mysterious. So just this idea that Hester's always like, where are you from? Who sent you? Are you an elf? Are you an nymph? Just like they don't know where the brook started from. and that both Pearl and the brook flowed through scenes shadowed as heavily with gloom. So with Pearl, this is basically, I take it as like living in Puritan society and being treated as an outcast, and how gloomy of a life this was for her. But unlike the little stream, she danced and sparkled. And so just this idea that Pearl overcomes, she's happy, she's capable of happiness, she's carefree. So then I just want to point this out again because it just reinforces this idea of how perceptive Pearl is. So she asks about Dimmsdale and having his hand over his heart and says, "Is it because when the minister wrote his name in the book, the black man set his mark in that place? But why does he not wear it outside his bosom as thou dost, mother?" Okay, so when Hester sees Dimmsdale coming, she wants to go talk to him in private, so she sends Pearl away, and Pearl starts gathering flowers. And one type of flower she gathers is violets. And so violets, they represent true love and emotional struggles, and so these both relate to Hester and Dimmsdale. And violets can also represent innocence and someone with deep spiritual insights, and these can both relate to Pearl. And apparently, when the angel Gabriel told Mary that she was going to have Jesus, violets blossomed. And so this could make you think back to chapter 2 when Hester is described as looking like the Virgin Mary holding Jesus up there on the scaffold with Pearl. And again, just kind of this comparison between Hester and Mary and Pearl and Jesus. And by comparison, I don't necessarily mean how they're the same, but also how they're in contrast to each other. They're different. The sinless mother versus the sinful mother, etc. Okay, so the second type of flower she gathers are wood anemones. And for this one, wood anemones symbolize death, so that could perhaps be foreshadowing. Forsaken or forgotten love, which could be, Hester and Chillingworth, Hester and Dimmsdale. It could have been in the past, maybe in the future. And anticipation, because we as readers are anticipating that Hester's about to tell Dimmsdale the truth and what's going to happen. And then scarlet columbines. So scarlet obviously is red. It makes us think of Hester's scarlet letter. Probably also makes us think about Dimmsdale's letter on his chest, which would also be red if it's, blood, or perhaps like branding, burning, but probably blood, like cutting himself. And then columbines symbolize adultery, so very fitting. So just noting that in this chapter we have a lot of pathetic fallacy, personification, some similes, analogies, and some symbolism. Okay, so finally, in this section, we're looking at Dimmsdale's weakness, and this will be really significant in chapter 17 as well. And so he's described as leaning on a staff, and he's a young man, so needing a cane is odd. He's described as looking haggard and feeble and having a listlessness in his gait, so he lacks energy. And here just talks about his mental state as well, as if he saw no reason for taking one step farther, nor felt any desire to do so. He doesn't even want to go on, right? It talks about how he would have been glad. Could he have been glad of anything? So he's in this depression, and he's not even capable of happiness. This kind of just links with how hopeless he is, maybe because his health is so bad, probably because he's so filled with guilt. Then here it talks about how he just wants to fling himself down at the root of the nearest tree and lie there passive forevermore. Okay, and passive is a good description of Dimmsdale, right? He doesn't really take any action. He just kind of lets life happen to him. And it talks about how he would just lay there, and the leaves might bestrew him, and the soil gradually accumulate and form a little hillock over his frame, no matter whether there were any life in it or no. And so it's even if basically he would just lay there, even if he wasn't dead, and just let the earth cover him up, right? That's how passive this guy is. So make sure you do the essential questions and thinking about why the forest is a fitting place. How does it represent Hester and Dimmsdale's emotional states? How does it represent why Hester's there? The idea that it offers privacy, the idea that the transcendentalist ideas that come with that, with it, about having freedom in society or freedom out in nature versus in society, and yeah, I'm sure you can keep going. And the devil being out there, like the devil's land and their relationship sinful, so it's a fitting place for a sinful relationship. There are tons of different things. And then make sure that you talk about how this chapter reflects Puritan ideas, which is basically like the devil being out in the forest, and then transcendentalist ideas, and highlight how well you feel like you can answer these two, and then highlight how well you feel like you can identify literary devices like pathetic fallacy, symbolism, similes, personifications, and analogies, and that you understand how this text reflects both Puritan and transcendentalist ideas.